Jess, I see you're ready to go, perhaps. All right, so next up
Yeah.
we have Jess Cancelliere, who will be talking about the Laurel Wilt quarantine. She is the section chief for the Department of Environmental Conservation, Lands and Forests. Did I get that right? I'm sorry, I just did that from memory because I saw you emailed me today.
That's fine. I'm the Forest Health Coordinator, Section Chief for DEC, Division of Lands and Forests. And thanks for having me today to talk about
Oh,
Laurel
it's
Wilt.
so nice to
So
hear your voice.
I'm just gonna mute that person. There we go. So, oops. I wanted to talk about the quarantine today, but for those of you who might not know that much about Laurel Wilt, I thought I would throw a few slides in there to give a little bit of background about the disease first and our current work on Long Island with Laurel Wilt, and then at the end, I'll talk more specifically about the quarantine. So, what is Laurel Wilt? It's a vascular wilt disease caused by a fungus, and it affects plants in the laurel family. And I'll talk about those hosts a little bit more in a minute. So it was first found in Georgia in the early 2000s, and since it's spread across the southeast up into Kentucky, Virginia. You can see the map up there in the upper right-hand corner. When it showed up on Long Island in 2025, it represented a pretty big jump from Virginia and Kentucky. Since none of the states in between have actually found it. They've started looking more intensively since our detection, but to date, there haven't been any additional positive detection. So that was a big jump. We think it might be related to movement of firewood or something like that. So in the southeast, it's had quite a huge impact. It affects red bay, which are big trees, swamp bay, plus it affects avocados. There was some industry down in the southeast around avocados, so that had some economic impacts as well. Um, and so it's killed millions of acres over time and been pretty devastating. It spreads by another invasive species, the red bay ambrosia beetle. Um, and we're not sure that that's the only beetle that spreads it. There's been some preliminary work done in the south, and so far we think that might be the only beetle, but we're still keeping an eye on some of our native ambrosia beetles here in New York. So we have found the invasive red bay ambrosia beetle on Long Island, but we hadn't found it prior to finding laurel wilt. We've done, early detection of bark beetles on Long Island for quite a while, and it's never showed up in one of our traps or anything. But we did find that Bartlett research lab had found some, and we were able to get beetles from them to send in for official confirmation. And so our concern is that, luckily the invasive red bay ambrosia beetle, well, I should first explain it spreads the disease by, it attacks a tree. In Long Island, the major hosts, or in New York, the major hosts are sassafras and spicebush. Again, I have some more information on this on another slide, but it attacks the tree where it deposits spores into the sapwood as it burrows into the tree, and then those spores begin to spread. So initially, it'll just create like partial crown discoloration, and the tree is like actively trying to wall that off. But over time, now this tree is stressed, it's drawing in additional red bay ambrosia beetles. They bring in more spores, and over time, it just kind of all coalesces, and you'll get total crown discoloration and wilting and eventual death. What's happening also in the meantime is that the tree is trying to fight the disease, and it's essentially like plugging its own vessels, in an attempt to defend itself from the disease, and that just interferes with nutrient and water transport, and it kills a tree or a plant in a relatively short period of time. I would say 6 to 8 weeks. Um, so like I said, in New York, the primary hosts are sassafras and spicebush, and it's a little confusing because there's a lot of other species that have the word laurel in them, and that kind of freaks people out. So this list on the right are all species that you don't have to worry about. Um, Sassafras and spicebush are pretty widely distributed throughout the state, but sassafras especially is kind of upstate is more of like an understory plant. It's found, often along edges or in early successional habitat. So while it's widely distributed, it's still kind of patchy. But on Long Island, it's sort of a unique situation where we actually have big mature sassafras that are like dominant overstory trees. So that's concerning from, both an ecological perspective of the impact of laurel wilt on Long Island, but also normally we wouldn't worry that much about the movement of sassafras around because it's not a timber species. And upstate, it wouldn't even be a firewood species most of the time. But on Long Island, our concern is that as these trees die, people are going to use them. They're going to be either removing them from their property and moving them elsewhere to dispose of, or they're going to be using it as firewood and bringing them to other parts of the state. So that's one reason why we feel like a quarantine is in order. Spice bush, on the other hand, is a very well distributed understory plant that's present across the state. So far on Long Island, we have not found laurel wilt in spice bush, and we're not sure why that is. One theory is that the beetles just prefer sassafras. They're bigger trees with a lot more woody material. So if there's sassafras on site, they're going to go to that. Um, will they go to the spice bush more after they've killed all the sassafras in an area? Perhaps. We just don't know yet. Okay. So a look at this family, Lauraceae, sassafras and spicebush on Long Island. There wasn't a lot of pre-existing data about the distribution of these species. In forest health, we often go by Forest Service distribution models, but these are mostly generated for larger, more dominant tree species. So, like I said before, sassafras is an understory species. Typically, spicebush is as well. So we didn't have that data. So we relied on iNaturalist to look for observations of it across the state, and that was actually really helpful. But it revealed that both species are widely distributed across Long Island and New York City. Um, and so that's concerning. Prior to Laurel Wilt being found, we were already having a lot of reports of sassafras and spicebush problems on Long Island, particularly spicebush, actually. And so we don't think that that was all Laurel Wilt. There's some other things going on with the species right now. There's this disease called ophiostoma that presents a lot of the same symptoms. And there's a researcher at Purdue University working on a lot of that because there's still like a lot unknown about how it presents or how it behaves in sassafras and spicebush. So there's other issues. But it was like something that we were almost anticipating for a while, just because we had had issues and so many reports of declining sassafras and spicebush that were like, we just kept saying, "Is it Laurel Wilt? Is it Laurel Wilt?" Like, no, not yet. But we knew that it was probably inevitable that it would show up. Um, However, we didn't think it would show up as quickly as it did, especially making that jump from Virginia. So, if you're out in the field, some things to look for. Um, the most obvious is that you're going to see wilting, like I said, very quickly, within weeks. So you might just happen to be out there at a time where, right in the middle of the growing season, these plants are brown and wilted. These photos are showing, a dominant sassafras tree in the middle there, but you'll often see sassafras in the understory and spicebush as well. And so here's a picture of like a young sassafras wilting in the understory. So you want to keep an eye out for both. If you're lucky, you might see these these like little frass tubes, I should say, caused by the ambrosia beetles. They look like little toothpicks sticking out of the tree bark, but they fall off quickly. So it's kind of unusual that you'll see those in the field. Um, if you go above that photo, in the upper right, that's showing a picture of tree bark that's discolored on the outside, this black staining that the fungus causes. You'll see it inside the tree, but also on the outside. And I kind of went out of order, but going back to the left, you'll see internal staining if you happen to cut into stems or, cut a stem down, you'll see the black staining throughout. And those are usually visible in both, like the main trunk of the tree, if you're peeling away bark, or in the smaller diameter stems. So our survey efforts last year, and we had a lot of partners help us with those. LIISMA surveyed a lot of areas, New York State Parks, DEC, Suffolk County, a lot of people helped out. And so it revealed multiple infestations across 3 townships on Long Island. We didn't send every symptomatic sample for positive confirmation because it was just a lot of work. And we have all those samples processed at the Cornell Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic. Sometimes they're also going through the Long Island Horticultural Research Extension Center for culturing, and then the genetic work was done at Cornell and Ithaca. But we didn't want to overwhelm the lab, so we tried to be selective about where we sampled. So the stars on the map represent positive detections that have been genetically confirmed, and then the little yellow circles represent symptomatic observations that were not sampled. So maybe Laurel Wilt, maybe not. But infestations were restricted to these three townships. And the reason I just point that out is because on the next map, when I show the quarantine district, it looks a little bit different. Um, and so here is our proposed quarantine map. So Forest Health, under an environmental law, I can't remember the name of it right now, but we have the authority to establish quarantines that restrict the movement of specific materials out of the quarantine zone. In this case, that would include sassafras and spicebush woody material and all species of firewood. And the reason we do that, all of our quarantine regulations include firewood because people can't always determine what species wood is when it's in the form of firewood. So we just include all of it. It's just part of the larger Don't Move Firewood campaign. There are some exceptions to this quarantine. One is if the material has been chipped to less than 1 inch in 2 dimensions, and that the chip material is contained on site for at least 7 days, or the material has been heat treated in a kiln certified by Ag and Markets. Now, again, most of you aren't moving around sassafras, and this is not going to impact you. The message that we're really trying to get this message mostly to landscapers, arborists, contractors that might be responding to dead sassafras, and removing it for people. So if, there's dead sassafras in Brookhaven, but the disposal facility is in Southampton, that could be an issue. So that's really who we're trying to reach. We've had a couple calls from people who like make art with sassafras. They make like wooden vases, things like that. There are exceptions. You can get a limited use permit through the DEC. And so I don't think it's really going to like hinder any existing operations from like things outside of landscaping. Again, that is our primary concern. It's not a timber species. Um, More than anything, the quarantine is an outreach tool just to spread the word. This is a disease that has no treatment. Um, in the South, they use sanitation, which has not particularly been effective. They just try to dispose or destroy material as quickly as possible and keep it on site. And even with those efforts, like in North Carolina, for example, they did that all along the east coast of North Carolina. Despite it, the disease still moved all the way into the mountains of Western North Carolina. So it's really the only tool we have is to prevent the movement. Now, we are hoping that this doesn't help Long Island, unfortunately, but for the rest of the state, the invasive red bay ambrosia beetle is very cold intolerant. It comes from South Asia, and so it's unlikely that it's just going to move up through various parts of the state. It's just way too cold intolerant. However, we're concerned that if there are other native ambrosia beetles that could spread it, that might be more cold tolerant, then it could certainly move up through the state. And so we did have a lot of, cold winter weather on Long Island this year. The temperatures got pretty low. So we do think that we were fortunate in that we probably had high mortality rates of the red bay ambrosia, and that has perhaps bought us some time. So survey efforts will continue this year, and we'll keep you all updated. But I think that we might see somewhat of a restriction in the population that won't get rid of it, but like I said, will at least buy us a little bit of time. Um, so in the meantime, this quarantine, we were hoping it was going to be done last month. It's not. We're anticipating this happening mid-June, optimistically. There will be a press release. We're notifying some partners in advance. So if you have any partners that you think might be affected by this, um, please let them know or reach out to me and I will talk to them. But yeah, we're just doing our best to get the message. out there, especially in advance. So, landscapers aren't taken by surprise when the press release comes out and, have questions and are confused about anything. We want to make sure that we give them the information they need in advance. And I think that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Right. Thank you.
I have one.
We do have a question. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm Marshall Brown, the Home Conservancy. So the animal dashboard also came in via pallets, I believe it was Canada. Here we have the red bay ambrosia beetle, also wooden pallets. The spotted lanternfly came in via landscaping stone. Again from China. And then, of course, we all know the story of the American chestnut. Is it the real problem that we're not doing nearly enough to interdict these invasive insects as they come shipping in?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and I think it's just simply because economy has always been a bigger driver of any actions that we take as human. It's like we are preaching to the choir often, right, in our community, and we're all scrambling and doing a lot on our level, um, without the power to influence regulation at a higher level. And I think, controlling global trade and having those, restrictions in place would be the ultimate solution. But because, money and economy drive everything, it feels like we'll never quite get there and we'll always be catching up and doing everything after the fact. So
Well, the
yeah,
cost of construction is cost justifies better regulation, arguably.
Oh yeah.
it absolutely does. And I think it's just about getting that message to the right people, right? Like, do we have the advocacy that we need to push these forward? There has been an increase in both treatment and inspection of woody materials. However, there's still just like so much stuff getting through that is uninspected. It's just probably a small fraction of what's coming through that is actually inspected. So it's improved, but there's like a long way to go.
Okay.
There's a resource you could look up called Tree Smart Trade, and it's like people that have, I think it's like the Carey Institute advocated for this kind of thing about pallets and woody stuff, and you could look up the stuff they've proposed.
Nice.
Question me on the CCD. Can you remind me how far the red bay beetle travels?
Not very far as we know. In fact, we're not even really going to be trapping for it. We are doing a couple little like trapping research projects, but we're not, with some pests, they get established and then we immediately start trapping to monitor and delineate the infestation. But that's not as effective with red bay ambrosia because what we've learned from our southern partners is that it doesn't go very far at all. So you really need to put a trap like right on the tree that the red bay is going to attack. So not super helpful. We think that it's mostly, again, just being moved around with firewood, or sometimes, these beetles are so small, like southern pine beetle, they can get caught up in wind currents and weather events and be deposited into new areas that way. Um, so we don't expect a lot of natural dispersal at this point out of the quarantine zone. But like I said, if there's enough being generated, um, they can get deposited. I mean, we speculate on that all the time with southern pine beetle. There's a massive population on Long Island, and we find it all throughout the eastern part of the state in these like random pitch pine stands. And we assume that
Hmm.
it's coming up in weather, wind currents and such, but we don't know for sure.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Tom.
It's Tom, Hagen Marls. Have any other host species been identified that are not present in the south or present up here?
Hmm.
No, not yet. Not that we're aware of. Um, there could doesn't mean that there aren't any, but as far as we know, it's just the sassafras and spicebush. There might be stuff right in like the horticultural trade or something, like hybrids and things like that. I don't know. And I'm glad you're there because I didn't talk too much about the AGM side of it. There are going to be restrictions with the quarantine within AGM too. If you're like a nursery grower, I should have mentioned this. If you're a nursery grower growing sassafras, you have to have a compliance agreement with AGM. and they need to inspect material. Again, it's not a huge concern because this stuff dies so quickly that like no one's going to buy or sell a wilted plant from a nursery. So, and there's not a lot of that in the nursery trade. AGM has already been looking at that for the last several months. So probably not going to be a huge thing. But Tom, you might be able to answer questions for people in person if they have them later regarding some of those specifics.
We definitely see more spice bush than sassafras, but occasionally there's some sassafras. And there's more and more native plant nurseries in New York growing specifically natives. So that would be another one. But right now, our horticulture inspectors are inspecting for it, obviously. But it's mostly spice bush.
Hmm.
That's why I was concerned with other species. So.
Right. And I think if there are, yeah, it's probably in the horticultural realm. I'm not aware of any in the forest.
Mhm. All right, that is all the questions we have time for. We're running a little bit late, but thank you so much, Jess,
Thanks,
for
Abby.
all those updates, and we'll stay tuned for the quarantine announcement.
Thanks, and thanks for all your support with the Laurel Wilt efforts.
All right, so now we're taking a break, 10-ish minute break. Help yourself some food, stretch your legs, and we'll be up next with talking about elf zigzag softline.